This case takes place on the 26th of October 1965 in Indianapolis, Indiana. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on the 3rd of January 1949 and was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and Elizabeth Frances. She was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, Daniel and Diana, who are 2 years older, as well as Benny and Jenny, who are 1 year younger. Jenny Likens suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be weaker than the other, resulting in her having to wear a steel brace on her leg. Sylvia was described as being friendly, confident, lively, and was known to her friends as Cookie. In June of 1965, both Sylvia and Jenny resided with their parents in Indianapolis. On the 3rd of July, their mother was arrested and jailed for shoplifting. Shortly thereafter, Lester Likens arranged for his daughters to live with a woman called Gertrude Banaszewski, the mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie. At the time of the boarding agreement, Gertrude assured Lester she would care for his daughters until his return as if they were her own children. Shortly after the 4th of July holidays, their sisters moved into 3850 East New York Street in order for their father and later their mother to travel to the East Coast with the carnival, with their understanding that Gertrude would receive a weekly boarding fee of $20 to care for their daughters until they returned in November of that year. During the initial weeks in which Sylvia and Jenny resided at the Banaszewski household, the sisters were subjected to very little discipline or abuse. The girls regularly sang along to pop records with Stephanie and willingly participated in housework. Both girls would also regularly attend Sunday school with the Banaszewski children. However, this would not last long. Although Lester Likens had agreed to pay Gertrude $20 a week in exchange for the care of his daughters, after approximately 2 weeks, these payments failed to consistently arrive upon the pre-arranged dates, occasionally arriving 1 or 2 days late. In response to this, Gertrude began venting her frustrations out on the sisters by beating their buttocks with various instruments, such as a 1/4 inch thick paddle, whilst making statements such as, "Well, I took care of you 2 little bitches for nothing." On one occasion in late August, both girls were beaten approximately 15 times on the back with the same paddle after Paula had accused the sisters of eating too much food at the church supper the household children had attended. By mid-August, Gertrude had begun to focus her abuse almost exclusively on Sylvia, with her primary motivation likely being jealousy of the girl's youth, appearance, respectability, and potential. This initial abuse included subjecting Sylvia to beatings, starvation, and forcing her to eat leftovers or spoiled food out of garbage cans. On one occasion, Sylvia was accused of stealing candy that she had actually purchased herself. On another occasion, in late August, Sylvia was subjected to humiliation when she claimed to have a boyfriend in Long Beach whom she had met in the spring of 1965 when her family lived in California. In response, Gertrude asked Sylvia if she had ever done anything with a boy, to which Likens, unsure of what her meaning was, replied, "I guess so," and explained that she had gone skating with the boys as well as going to the park on the beach with them. Sylvia mentioned that she had laid under the covers with her boyfriend, and upon hearing this, Gertrude asked why, to which Sylvia responded saying, "I don't know." Several days later, Gertrude brought the subject back up with Sylvia by telling her, "You're certainly getting bigger in the stomach. Looks like you're going to have a baby." Sylvia thought this was a joke and said, "Yeah, it sure is getting bigger. I'm going to have to go on a diet." Gertrude told Sylvia and the other girls that whenever they did something with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby. She then kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Paula, who was then 3 months pregnant herself and also jealous of Sylvia's physical appearance, also participated in attacking Sylvia, knocking her off her chair and onto the kitchen floor, shouting, "You ain't fit to sit in a chair." On another occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude, Paula and a neighbourhood boy called Randy Gordon Lepper force-fed Likens a hot dog overloaded with condiments, including ketchup, mustard and spices. Sylvia vomited as a result and was later forced to consume what she had regurgitated. In what was Likens' only act of retaliation, she is alleged to have spread a rumour at Arsenal Technical High School that Stephanie and Paula were prostitutes, because she was upset with the household singling her out for similar accusations. Whilst at school, Stephanie was jokingly propositioned by a boy who told her that Likens had started this rumour about her. Upon returning home that day, Stephanie questioned Likens about the rumour and she admitted to starting it. Stephanie punched her in response, but Likens apologised to her in tears and Stephanie then also began to cry. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Randolph Hubbard, heard of the rumour, he brutally attacked Likens, slapping her, banging her head against the wall, and flipping her backwards onto the floor. When Gertrude found out, she used a paddle to beat Likens. On another occasion, Paula beat Likens about the face with such force that she broke her own wrist, having primarily focused on her blows upon Likens' teeth and eyes. Later, Paula used the cast on her wrist to further beat Likens. Gertrude repeatedly falsely accused Likens of engaging in prostitution, ranting about the filthiness of prostitution and women in general. Gertrude would later occasionally force Jenny to strike her own sister, beating Jenny if she did not comply. Coy Hubbard and several of his classmates frequently visited the Benisuski residence to both physically and verbally torment Likens, often collaborating with the other children and Gertrude herself. With Gertrude's active encouragement, these neighbourhood children routinely beat Likens, sometimes using her as a practice dummy in her violent judo sessions, lacerating her body, burning her with lit cigarettes in excess of over 100 times, and severely injuring her genitals. To entertain Gertrude and her teenage accomplices, Likens was forced to one point strip naked in the family living room and masturbate with a glass of Pepsi Cola. With Gertrude starting to all present that this act of humiliation was to Sylvia was to prove to Jenny what kind of girl you are. Gertrude eventually forbade Likens from attending school after she confessed to have stolen a gym suit from the school due to Gertrude having refused to purchase the clothing for her. For this act, Gertrude wiped Likens with a 3-inch wide police belt. Gertrude switched her conversations to the evils of premarital sex, before repeatedly kicking Likens in the genitals as Stephanie rallied to Likens' defence, shouting she didn't do anything. Gertrude then burned Likens' fingertips with the matches before further wiping her. A few days later, Gertrude reportedly whipped Jenny with the police belt after she reportedly stole a single tennis shoe from the school to wear on her strong foot. On one occasion in September, the girls encountered their older sister Diana Shoemaker at a local park. Both Jenny and Sylvia informed Diana about the abuse that they were enduring at the hands of their caregiver, adding that Sylvia was being specifically targeted for physical abuse and has always been blamed for things that she had never said or done. Neither sister mentioned the actual address as to where they were living, and initially Diana believed her sisters must have been exaggerating their claims regarding their scope of their mistreatment. Several weeks prior to this, Sylvia and Jenny had encountered Diana in the same park while in the company of 11-year-old Marie Banaszewski, and Sylvia had been given a sandwich to eat when she mentioned to her sister that she was hungry. Likens remained silent about the matter, although Marie revealed that to this family that in late September. In response, Gertrude accused Likens of engaging in gluttony before she and Paula choked and bludgeoned her. The pair then subjected Likens to a scalding bath in order to cleanse her of sin, with Gertrude grabbing Likens' hair and repeatedly banging her head against the bath to revive her whenever she fainted. Shortly after this incident, the father of the neighbourhood boy named Michael John Monroe phoned Arsenal Technical High School to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living at the Banaszewski household. As Likens had not attended the school for several days, a school nurse visited East New York Street to investigate these claims. Gertrude claimed to the nurse that Likens had run away from her home the previous week and that she was unaware of her actual whereabouts, adding that Likens was out of control and that her open sores were a result of Likens' refusal to maintain decent personal hygiene. Gertrude further claimed that Likens was a bad influence on both her children and her sister. The school made no further investigations concerning Likens' welfare. The immediate neighbours of the Banaszewski family were a middle-aged couple named Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion. Both initially viewed Gertrude as an ideal caregiver for the Likens sisters, and both had visited the residence on 2 occasions while the girls had been under her care. On both occasions, however, the Vermillions witnessed Paula physically abusing Likens, who on both occasions had a black eye and openly boasting about her mistreatment of the child to them. Upon the second visit to the Banaszewski household, both observed Likens to appear extremely weak and somewhat zombified in nature. Nevertheless, the Vermillions never reported the Likens' evident mistreatment to the authorities. Due to the increase of the frequency of the brutality of the torture and mistreatment Likens was subjected to, she gradually became incontinent. She was denied any access to the bathroom, being forced to wet herself as a form of punishment for her incontinence. On October 6th, Gertrude threw Likens into the basement and tied her up. Here, Likens was often forced to be kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. Occasionally, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs with her feet barely touching the ground. In the weeks prior to locking Likens in the family basement, Gertrude had increasingly abused and tormented Likens. She would occasionally falsely claim to the children in her household that either she, herself, or one of them had been receiving direct insults from Likens in the hope that this would provoke them into belittling or attacking her. On one occasion, Gertrude held a knife aloft and challenged Likens to "fight me back," which Likens replied she did not know how to fight. In response, Gertrude inflicted a light scour wound to Likens' leg. Physical and mental torment such as this would occasionally pause when the Beneszewskis watched their favourite television shows. Neighbourhood children were also occasionally charged 5 cents apiece to see the display of the Likens' body, and to humiliate, beat, scald, burn, and ultimately mutilate her. Throughout Likens' captivity in the basement, Gertrude frequently, with the assistance of her children and neighbourhood children, restrained and gagged Likens before placing her into a bathtub filled with scalding hot water and proceeding to rub salt into her wounds. On October 22nd, John Beneszewski Jr. tormented Likens by offering to allow her to eat a bowl of soup with her fingers and then quickly taking away the bowl when Likens, by this stage suffering from extreme malnourishment, attempted to eat the food. Gertrude eventually allowed Likens to sleep upstairs on the condition that she learned not to wet herself. That night, Sylvia whispered to Jenny to secretly give her a glass of water before falling asleep. The following morning, Gertrude discovered that Likens had urinated on herself, and as punishment, Likens was forced to insert an empty glass Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina in the presence of everyone in the household. Shortly thereafter, Gertrude shouted for Likens to return to the kitchen, then ordered her to strip naked before proclaiming to her, "You have branded my daughters, now I am going to brand you." She began carving the words, "I'm a prostitute and proud of it," onto Likens' abdomen with a heated needle. When Gertrude was unable to finish the branding, she instructed one of the neighbourhood children present, a 14-year-old Richard Dean Hobbs, to finish etching the words into Likens' flesh as she took Jenny to the nearby grocery store in what Hobbs would later insist were short, light etchings. He continued to brand the text into Likens' abdomen as she clenched her teeth and moaned. Both Hobbs and 10-year-old Shirley then led Likens into the basement, where they each proceeded to use an anchor bolt in an attempt to burn the letter S beneath Likens' left breast. Although they applied one to each section of the loop backwards, and this deep burn scar would resemble the number 3. By the morning of October 26th, Likens was unable to either speak or coordinate the movement of her limbs. Gertrude moved Likens into the kitchen and, having popped her back against the wall, attempting to feed her a donut and a glass of milk, she threw Likens to the floor in frustration. When Likens was unable to correctly move the glass of milk to her lips, she was then returned to the basement. Shortly thereafter, Likens became delirious, repeatedly moaning and mumbling. When Paula asked her to recite the English alphabet, Likens was unable to recite anything beyond the first 4 letters, or to raise herself off of the ground. In response, Paula verbally threatened her to either stand up or she would inflict a long jump upon her. Gertrude then ordered Likens, who had defecated, to clean herself. That afternoon, several of Likens' other tormentors gathered in the basement. Likens jerkingly moved her arms in an apparent attempt to point to the faces of the tormentors she could recognize, making statements such as, "You're Ricky," "You're Gertie," before Gertrude shouted, "Shut up." Minutes later, Likens unsuccessfully attempted to bite into a rotten pear she had been given to eat, stating she could feel the looseness in her teeth upon hearing this. Jenny replied, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7. Jenny then left Sylvia in the basement to perform gardening chores for neighbours in the hope of earning some spending money. Later on, in an attempt to wash Likens, a laughing John Beneszewski Jr. sprayed her with a garden hose, brought to the house that afternoon by Randy Lepper at Gertrude's request. Likens again desperately attempted to exit the basement, but collapsed before she could even reach the stairs. In response to this effort, Gertrude stamped upon Likens' head before standing and staring at her for several moments. Shortly after 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs returned to the residence and immediately proceeded to the basement. He slipped on the wet basement stairs and fell heavily onto the floor of the basement, to be confronted with the sight of Stephanie crying and cuddling Likens' immaculated and lacerated body after she had been ordered by her mother to clean Sylvia. Stephanie and Richard then decided to give Likens a warm, soapy bath and dress her in new clothes. They then laid her upon a mattress in one of the bedrooms. As Sylvia muttered, her final wish was that her daddy was here and that Stephanie would take her home. Stephanie then turned to her younger sister Shirley, exclaiming, "Oh, she'll be alright." When Stephanie realised that Likens was not breathing, she attempted to apply mouth-to-mouth resuscitation as Gertrude repeatedly shouted to the children in the house that Likens was faking her death. Likens was only 16 years old when she finally succumbed to her injuries.